You are listening to Travel with the Backpacking Housewife podcast. I'm your host, Janice Horton, an ex-housewife, an empty nester, and normally a nomadic world traveller who loves to discuss travel and dreamy destinations all over the world, and in particular, the pros and cons of midlife and senior travel, and about making the most of opportunities to travel in retirement, or what I like to call the golden age of travel. Welcome to episode 16, in which I'd love to tell you a travel story and share with you one of the most exciting road trips, one of the great all-American road trips in fact, the 165-mile road trip from Miami to Key West on Overseas Highway, also known as US Highway 1, and how we ended up doing this trip by Greyhound Bus. We'd arrived in Florida, USA at the end of May, not realising it was Memorial Day. That's a bit crazy, I know, when it's one of the biggest and busiest holidays of the year in the US. But, in our defence, we had been travelling for a while off-grid, having just landed in Miami from Honduras, Central America, and we were feeling a bit of culture shock about being back in the first world, and we'd sort of lost track of time. Miami was hot and crazy as we joined the jostling crowds on Ocean Drive and slowly explored the famous beach and Art Deco area on the busy holiday weekend. It soon made sense to us to head out of town, and so we decided to take a road trip, one that we'd always aspired to do, and that was to travel down to the Florida Keys, all the way to Key West, and to the southernmost point of the USA on Highway 1. It seemed to us that the Florida Keys would be the perfect destination to get away from the hustle and bustle of the tourist hotspots of Orlando, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Daytona Beach, and the Space Coast. We knew the Keys were connected by bridges and causeways, and so I did a bit of research online to discover that there are actually 42 bridges connecting these islands. The longest is, of course, the famous 7-Mile Bridge. The shortest is called the Harris Gap, which is only 37 feet long. And each island that makes up the Florida Keys offers unique features, and the first one you encounter is Key Largo, which promises some of the best diving, snorkeling, fishing and boating experiences in the Keys. As the backpacking husband is a very keen scuba diver, we decided to stop off for a couple of nights at Key Largo to allow for some diving and sightseeing and to enjoy some laid-back nightlife before continuing on our road trip to Key West. I couldn't wait to experience all that Key West had to offer us: the history, the romance, the Hemingway house, food, drink, and the tropical ambience that Key West is so famous for. We had thought about renting a classic red Mustang convertible for our classic road trip, and I'd imagined us driving over the famous bridges in style and with the sun on our faces and the wind in our hair. But when we saw the sheer amount of crazy traffic coming in and out of Miami on Memorial Day, we started to consider our options, and we decided that we'd leave the driving to someone else. So instead, we decided to take a bus. And what's more iconic than a Greyhound bus in the USA? Travelling by Greyhound bus was great fun. We viewed it as a bit of an adventure. And you can find out about Greyhound bus routes and schedules and bus stops and how to buy tickets online. The buses are comfortable and clean and equipped with a toilet. They have planned rest stops so you can stretch your legs and get some refreshments along the way, and it's a great way to travel. So, as planned, we took the Greyhound bus to Key Largo, which only took a couple of hours, and it was a very pleasant and interesting ride through the Everglades on Highway 1. Our driver advised us to keep a sharp lookout for alligators along each side of the road, where it was mangrove swamp, and, although I did so, to my disappointment, I didn't actually see one. We stayed 2 nights on Key Largo, and we had a wonderful time. We stayed at the Holiday Inn Key Largo. It's right next door to the marina, and so we had a wonderful view from our room, and we just were steps away from the home of the originally renovated steamboat, the African Queen, which starred in the movie with Bogart and Hepburn in 1951. It was great to see it on the dock. And if you check out the corresponding post to this podcast on my website at thebackpackinghousewife.com, entitled Road Trip from Miami to Key West by Greyhound Bus, you'll be able to see all my photos from this fabulous trip. The Florida Keys are home to the USA's only coral barrier reef. The reef is teeming with marine life and coral formations, and the government has established the Florida Keys Marine Sanctuary to preserve and protect the reef. There are dozens of dive centres offering dive experiences and courses. Most sites are a short boat ride away, and there are both shallow reefs for snorkelers and deeper reefs for experienced divers. The backpacking husband, he dived with Horizon Divers on Key Largo. For the second leg of our road trip, which would take us all the way to Key West, we met with the Greyhound Bus just across the street from our hotel. I was delighted to snag front row seats so that we had an uninterrupted view of the road ahead of us and all the famous bridges through the bus's large windscreen. Unexpectedly, one of the very best things about this bus trip was all the people we met on the bus. There was about a dozen other people riding down to Key West. Sitting near to us were two older ladies, and behind them other couples of various ages. Across from us, a young man travelling solo. We all got introduced, and we got chatting about where we were all from, and I suppose as the only two Scottish people on the bus, we were something of a novelty to everyone else, as they were all from different places in the US. Everyone was incredibly friendly and interesting, and the atmosphere on board the bus was chatty and lively, almost party-like, as we shared our travel stories and all the drinks and snacks that we'd all brought along. From Key Largo, Isla Morada is the next key in the chain, and it is in fact a village of islands and canals, and it offers some of the best sports fishing. Then there's Marathon Key, which is also a chain of over a dozen connected islands stretching over a distance of 10 miles. From Marathon, you drive over the famous 7-mile bridge, one of the longest bridges in the world. There's a feeling of total awe as you cross the bridge, and it feels like you're flying over the ocean with azure blue waters on either side of you. We had a great view from those front row seats on the bus. On the lower keys that have lovely names like Big Pine Key, Little Duck Key, Ohio Key and Sunshine Key, Summerland Key, Big Torch and Little Torch, Sugarloaf Key, Stock Island and the uninhabited Sandalbush Islands, we stopped off at a roadside burger place and a rest stop to have a bite of lunch, to freshen up and to restock on drinks and snacks. And by this time, everyone on the bus were now good friends. The two older women told us that they liked to collect discount coupons. And apparently this is a really serious thing to do in the USA. And they insisted on handing out discount coupons to all of us on the bus so that we could all get burgers and fries, an ice cream and a drink, all for $5. Well, I don't think those serving at the burger place that day had ever sold so much for so little, as we all lined up to place our food orders and hand over our discount coupons. Then, a little later, back on the bus, I started up a conversation with the young man that was travelling alone, and he told me that he was a musician from New Orleans. He generously shared with me his top tips for New Orleans and his list of recommended music venues, which I hastily jotted down in my notebook. He told us the bars to drink at, the music scene to look for, and to pay the cover fees to enter music venues on Frenchman Street, as that was the very best way to see the greatest artists and hear the best in jazz and blues, for which New Orleans is famous. I told him that New Orleans for me was somewhere I'd always wanted to go, and that I had a kind of strange fascination for it. The music, the food, the history, and unbeknown to us at that time, that list and those recommendations that he shared with me on that day would go on to form the basis of a fabulous, never-to-be-forgotten adventure in New Orleans just a week later. Because at the time, we hadn't yet made any firm destination plans for what we might do next or where we might go after Key West. We were living like free spirits at the time, leaving space in our lives for spontaneity, and that really worked out well for us because, as it turned out, a week later we would decide to fly directly to New Orleans from the airport on Key West. And who knew that when we'd stepped onto that bus, that a fateful meeting with a stranger would shape our future travel plans. You can read about our amazing time in New Orleans on my website at thebackpackinghousewife.com in a post entitled New Orleans, Jazz, Blues, Oyster Bars and Voodoo. And I'm pretty sure that the experience will also be a subject of a podcast very soon. We eventually arrived in Key West as the backpacking husband and I were celebrating a wedding anniversary, and we had already booked to stay in a very nice room at the boutique Lighthouse Hotel. It was just a mango throw away from the Key West Historic District and Duval Street. Our accommodation was in a small and beautiful cottage with a patio out front, and it was just across the street from the Hemingway house. As there are so many places to choose to stay in the Florida Keys, from big-name resort hotels, smaller motels and hotels, to private B&Bs, I recommend you search hotel websites on the internet and check with online booking agents for the best deals. But as a top travel tip, if you find the place you really want to stay and it's fully booked on the booking site, then in my experience, it's always worth calling the accommodation directly to check that it's actually the case. You might get lucky as we did with our stay at the Lighthouse. So let's look at the top things to do in Key West. First of all, entertainment and dining. The food and entertainment at the Keys is spectacular. From fine dining to bar food, you won't find better. You'll be certain to find a place and a plate and a price to suit your taste. Don't forget to check out Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville on Duval Street. It's the original one and exactly where you'll find the perfect margarita. The shopping in Key West centres around Duval Street, where you can find everything from a bargain souvenir to a world-class piece of art. The entire island features the clapboard homes and architecture that it has become famous for, and taking the conch tour train, as we did, is probably the best way of seeing it all. While in Key West, I also got the ultimate in souvenirs, as I got a new tattoo. I had a couple of yoga-style wrist tattoos of a lotus flower and a Om at the most southernmost tattoo shop in the USA on Duval Street. For sightseeing, we also enjoyed the Shipwreck Museum and the view of Key West from the top of the old wreck spotting tower. And while we were in Key West, there happened to be a special Ernest Hemingway exhibition on at the museum. Ernest Hemingway was the winner of the Pulitzer Prize for writing fiction in 1953 and the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1954. For his mastery of the art of narrative, most recently demonstrated with The Old Man and the Sea, and for the influence that he has exerted on contemporary style. In the museum, there were lots of exhibits and pictures and movie posters, all reflecting Hemingway's work. But the centrepiece was a bronze sculpture capturing a young and enthusiastic and adventurous Hemingway fishing off his beloved boat, the Pillar. As I'm a writer myself, I was engrossed and enthralled by the life of Hemingway, and so, after exploring the Hemingway exhibition, I was particularly keen to tour the Hemingway house. Ernest Hemingway's first visit to Key West in 1928 was only meant to be a short stopover, but once he'd felt the sun on his face and inhaled the salty air and met with the locals, he knew it would be his home with his second wife Pauline. The house is impressive and has the distinct air and rich ambience of old-world elegance. A high brick boundary keeps the property private, but the view from the first floor wraparound porch takes in not only the garden, but the adjacent street, on what is an affluent residential part of town. I loved walking around the airy rooms and the book-lined hallways, taking in all the family photos and the personal effects. And I could almost pretend that I was a house guest exploring the place while Ernest and Pauline, who was Hemingway's second wife, had just popped out momentarily. The house gives the visitor a real feel for the life of the Hemingways that they led in Key West during the 1930s. Our tour guide happily gave out lots of insider information about the house and about the escapades of the children, the Hemingway marriage, and the huge row over the swimming pool and Ernest Hemingway's last penny. The story is that the swimming pool, which replaced what had been Ernest's personal boxing ring, was contracted at great expense by Pauline after she'd found out about her husband's affair with Martha Gellhorn, his third wife-to-be. When Ernest came back from assignment to find out the exorbitant cost of the pool, he was reported to have thrown a penny onto the ground in front of Pauline, saying, "You've spent all but my last penny, so you may as well have that as well." And Pauline had the penny set into the path where it lay, and it's still there today. Another extraordinary feature of the house are all the cats. These are descendants of a six-toed cat called Snowball. One of Snowball's kittens, named Snow White, was gifted to Ernest Hemingway by a salvage and shipwreck captain, a respected and official position in those days, and he was called Harold Stanley Dexter. Ever since, the six-toed gene has been passed through all the generations of cats at the Hemingway house, and they're all named after Ernest's famous friends. The cat I met was called Rita Hayworth. In Key West, Hemingway soon became an avid sports fisherman. In 1938, he established a world record for catching 7 marlin in one day. He also garnered a reputation for hard drinking, with his new friends Josie Sloppy Joe Russell and fisherman Eddie Bra Saunders, and his brother Burge, and later Toby Bruce, who became his right-hand man and lifelong companion. So if you do find yourself in Florida, I urge you to head down on Highway 1 and explore the Florida Keys. There is so much to do throughout the Keys, and Key West absolutely lived up to my high expectations. It's so clean and so pretty, almost Disney Town in its perfection. It's historic by American standards, and its buildings and wooden clapboard houses with wraparound porches and white picket fences give the place a surreal look, and Hemingway's house is a prime example. I loved finding out about one of my writer heroes. Plus, the food is fabulous and the restaurants are plentiful. In the Hemingway tradition, bars are a fun feature too, and Sloppy Joe's bar is still there. Duval Street is eye-popping in that there's so much to see, and this is where I would urge you to look both left and right in case you miss something. Art galleries, museums, fabulous restaurants, bars and souvenir shops. There's a Walgreens shop housed in a disused but iconic theatre frontage. The original Jimmy Buffett's Margaritaville is there. The Marilyn Monroe statue is a great photo opportunity outside the Tropic Theatre. And Key West is almost a theme park in all that it offers. So tell me, are the Keys on your Florida wish list? Or have you already experienced Key West? If so, how did you get there? Get in touch and let me know. You can email me through my contact page on my website at thebackpackinghousewife.com or get in touch through my social media channels. I'm on Facebook as The Backpacking Housewife, and I'm on Instagram as Janice Horton Writer. And if you're on Twitter, please do tweet me to tell me about your travel plans for this year or in the near future at Janice Horton. That's JANICEHORTON. And do come and travel with me here on Travel with the Backpacking Housewife podcast. Do subscribe and follow for inspiring and informative new episodes each week, in which I'll be discussing ways to plan for and to prioritize travel and adventure in our lives and in our new future, in what is set to become a new and golden age of travel.